I ended up at one point losing 30 pounds in 30 days. My blood sugars were so high that the medical grade glucometers could not read it. They just don't trade your health for your career or any other responsibility you have, because that's a very bad trade. Without your health, nothing else matters. Ideas that you can try that take 1, 2, 3 minutes, how to not have a distracted mind. But the reality is I do. If we're going to be dumping the adrenaline and cortisol into our bodies regardless. So why not have it be a positive outcome as opposed to a negative outcome? A lot of people absolutely love meditation, and I'm a big proponent of it, but it's not one of my favorites. It does work for me, but it doesn't work great. Your health is paramount to your success, so don't trade your health. Without your health, nothing else matters. It really doesn't.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Toms, and this is Love Your Stress podcast. And today we have a guest, Professor Pete, and we're going to talk about stress management, and maybe do something fun as well. So, welcome, Pete. Happy to have you here.
Thank you, Tom, for having me on your show, and I'm really excited to share some ideas with your audience.
Yeah. So, one of the first questions I will ask you is, how would you like to be known in this world?
Oh, that's a great question. For me, I look at it as somebody who made a positive difference in this world. That's really, really how, if I, at the end of my life, if people can think of me in a positive manner because I made a difference, then I've done my job.
And do you have any specific area you want to be bit more known? And others, like for example, Leonardo da Vinci, great inventor, known for many things, and there are some areas where he's known a bit more than others. So, do you have any specific area?
Yeah, I would say that for me, it would be that I helped lighten somebody's day through an interaction with me. So I was consistent in that manner.
Sounds great. And one of the first questions I always ask on my podcast is, how would you define stress in your own words, if you had to?
Oh, well, I would say stress. That's a great question, because we all, depending on how we experience stress, we can define it differently. For me, I actually like to define it in two ways. There's good stress and there's bad stress. And for many of your listeners, they probably know good stress is also called eustress, eustress. And that's the kind of stress that we need in our lives. It's the stress that allows us to get things done, like if we have a deadline. And if we're working on something that we are passionate about, excited about, eustress is actually a positive thing. Where my experience working with different people and my experience with myself, where we really need to focus on is on the negative stress, or some people call it distress, distress. And in my experience, that comes in two different flavors: either ruminating about something in the past that we can't change, and that often a big one there is guilt. Maybe
Mhm.
guilt about that we never did something, or we did something and we feel guilty about it. And then the other flavor is anxiety about the future, about a future that may or may not happen. And we manifest about, oh, this is going to turn out terribly. And what ends up happening? It turns out terribly, because we send that negative energy that direction. And so if we can really focus on taking care of not ruminating about the past and not having so much anxiety about the future, all other stress is no problem.
I love how you tie the emotions to the stress and stress definition, uh, and also linking them to the past, future, and to the mind. And I'm looking now at your tagline up there, stress relief made simple.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to basically, you meet person on the street, on a bus station, wherever you're waiting in line, and if you had to have just one thing you can share, like maybe like 1 minute or something, just to have this the most impact you can on this person, what do you say to that person?
I would say my favorite stress relief tool, which is have gratitude, not
Mm.
just for the big things, but the little things that we take for granted each day. So if I'm standing at the bus stop and the bus comes, how about having gratitude for the fact that A, the bus came, B, maybe the bus is on time, C, there's room for me on the bus. So it's, these are minor things, but it makes all the difference in our mindset, as you mentioned earlier. And my wife and I, we do a daily gratitude exercise at the end of the day, right before we go to bed. I ask her, what is she grateful for? And she tells me what she's grateful for. And then she asks me the same thing. And I always start with, I'm grateful for my health. And the reason that I say I'm grateful for my health is because I have found that without your health, nothing else matters. It really doesn't. And then I go through and I think about the different things, the different people, the different experiences that I might have had in that day that were real positives that I'm grateful for. And what happens is, by doing this activity right before bed, you go to bed with a really positive mindset, and it just helps to calm you, and it usually lines up for a very good night's sleep.
I can totally relate to this one. I remember a couple of years ago, I was highly stressed, and I basically went to sleep with a idea I haven't done enough today, and that disrupted my sleep pattern
Mm-hmm.
and immune system eventually, because I wasn't resting at all during the
Mm-hmm.
time when my
Mm-hmm.
body needed to recuperate. And I was thinking, because in those kind of mindsets, it's when you say practice gratitude, it's not easy to switch from I have so many things on my plate, there's not enough time, I cannot grateful for what? Bus? I have bigger problem that bus not coming at time.
Yep.
So I was thinking, do you have any kind of tips and tricks how to shift the mindset for this kind of person who's really highly stressed, and you ask them to do the gratitude test and or gratitude practice, and they kind of say grateful for what?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's it. Obviously, they're not in the right mindset for gratitude. That's one thing. But you mentioned like that you stayed awake at night because you didn't get enough done.
Yes.
So instead of thinking about, oh my gosh, what I didn't do, what I always recommend to people is to write down an accomplishment list at the end of the day. What did you get done? And you have to really look at it and think, okay, yes, so maybe I didn't get this important report done or something like that, but there are things that you did do. And maybe they weren't as big on the task list, but you did get things done. And what happens is if we can think about it from a mind shift of going from beating ourselves up about something we didn't accomplish to acknowledging and celebrating the things we did accomplish, we are more likely to get more done because we're coming from a mindset of positivity as opposed to a mindset of negativity, where we are, we're our own worst critics. We always are. There's that inner critic that'll always come in. Oh, and the thing is, our inner critic is actually there to help us. It's there to help us because it doesn't want us to fail. So, our inner critic is saying, oh, don't do this because you're not like, you've never done this before. You might fail, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, if we stay in that mindset of fear, we won't accomplish the things that we really want to set out for. And if you're fearful about doing something new, let's say interviewing for a particular job that is higher up than you've been before, or you're stretching yourself in any particular way, your inner critic is going to come in there and is going to say, oh, are you sure you want to do this? Don't do this. Don't do this. And if we listen to it, what's going to happen is we're going to not grow. But instead, if we think about fear as a 4-letter acronym, and that 4-letter acronym, FEAR, F-E-A-R, stands for fictional evidence appearing real. And that's for our inner critic, fictional evidence. Oh, you can't do this. You can't do this. That's our inner critic saying this. Well, how do you know we can't do this? Right? Haven't tried before. So how would your inner critic know you can't do it if you've never tried before? You might try it the very first time and it would work just fine. You won't know until you try. So it's, again, going back to that mindset and not focusing on the negative, but looking at the positive.
Yeah, I really love the answer, how in depth it went, and I can relate because when you start in the mindset I described before, when I was just focusing on what I haven't done, and it actually worked. Once I actually started focusing on the things I actually have done during the day, I suddenly started finding out all the things I actually did done, and I was busy and I was doing a lot of things, and then I realized, wow, the list of things I actually done is so big that okay, I didn't do something, but I actually did manage to move quite a big step forward towards actually doing the thing I wanted to do, and that made quite a big difference.
It does.
And
And I used to, when I was early in my career, I'm a highly productive person, and so I learned to keep an accomplishment list, not just of the day, but main things, important things that I had done for the company. And then when it came time for me to go into my review with my boss for my salary increase or maybe a promotion, I had this huge list of things that I had done. And I could just hand it to my boss and say, okay, I'm productive. Look what I've accomplished, all these different things that have impacted the company. So, and if you don't uh, keep a file of that, either it's a daily one or weekly or a monthly, whatever it is, of the things that you're getting done, it's going to be harder to remember those when it comes time to support why you should be getting a bigger raise or why you should get a promotion.
that's a really handy tip. Why the list can be handy not only to increase your mood and productivity day-to-day basis, but it also can impact your wage or whatever in the long term.
Absolutely.
It's a good one. And also, I love how you touched about the inner critic there. That I noticed in my personally that I tend to have such a strong inner critic that I couldn't care less about other people, what they criticize me about, because I'm criticizing myself so much more. So, what do you say about a person, such a person? How would you approach this person?
So, yes, what I would say, okay, for a person who's so first of all, I like the fact that you're not listening to someone else criticize you, because if that is a huge positive. I like to use the comment that you can't make everybody happy because you're not a pizza. That's the thing is we're not pizza, so there's not everyone's going to love us. And I remember that when I first started teaching college classes, and I would, at the end of the course, they would do the course evaluations, and I would have 30, 40 students in my class. And 29 or 39 of the evaluations I get would come back outstanding. But there was always one. There was always one person who didn't like my class, didn't like my facilitation, whatever it was. And I remember that I would look there and go, oh my gosh, how did I fail? I'm looking at 1 out of 30 or 1 out of 40 people and completely ignoring the other 29 or 39 people who said this was the best class I've ever had. So, what I learned is that, okay, I'm not a pizza. I'm not going to be great for everybody, but if I can be a positive influence, if I can make an impact on the majority of people that I interact with, whether they're my students, whether they're people I've coached, whether it's people I've worked with, whether it's my friends and family, etc., then I've made the impact. Now, if you are focusing on yourself and just beating yourself up, the reality is you are your most important critic. No one else can have more of an influence on you than your own self, your own mind. And what I would say is if you being a person is so critical of yourself, then it's important to really look at what caused that. And it could be many different situations, but a lot of times what I find is that it could be a critical parent, for example, as a child, and you grew up with either a critical father, a critical mother, somebody that was important in your life who you felt like as a child that you could not please that person. And being a people pleaser is not something that is a positive for us, because if we are a people pleaser, if we act like a people pleaser, we will always put the other person's needs, opinions, etc., ahead of our own. But if we can realize that, if we can love ourselves, and what I like to take from all of my training over the years is become your own loving parent, where you are your strongest supporter. That is so critical, because when you have obstacles, when we're going to have adversity, like we always have, that's part of life. That's what part makes life interesting in many respects. You need to be able to overcome that. And the best way you can overcome that is to be positive with yourself. We're going to make mistakes. It's the reality. We're going to make mistakes. But instead of looking at our mistakes as, oh, I made that mistake, I'm so ignorant. Instead of thinking that way, think, okay, I made that mistake because I was stretching myself. I was doing something that I've never done before, or I'm working harder than I have in the past. And I've learned from this mistake that I need to try it a different way. Basically, our mistakes are, in reality, the universe telling us you need to try something else. It's not that you failed. You made a mistake. You just got to try something else because you've gone farther than you've gone before.
Yeah, I really loved how you open up the answer to the question, acknowledging that there's a huge step already done, that I'm not listening to other people's criticism. That's acknowledging that alone is kind of a really big win, especially quite recently I heard that it's quite common as well not to take compliments, because when you're a critic, it's also you don't take and it's kind of related, because if I'm not taking anyone else's criticism, I'm also not taking anyone else's compliments, because it's not true. And quite recently I realized that it's not just me, that it's also a problem to take anyone compliments, and criticism kind of comes in a same package. Have you seen that one?
I have not seen it that specifically, because getting compliments obviously is easier to take. Now you can you can push them aside and not take them for anything other than okay, thank you, and you just keep on moving on. But criticism is something that tends to hit us deeper. And so it goes back again to, if we are a people pleaser, we're trying to get acknowledgement from others, then criticism's going to hurt. But yes, if you can get into the practice of, not just letting the criticism bounce off of you, if it's nice to hear the positives that somebody says to you, and if nothing else, at least acknowledge them by saying thank you. Have gratitude that they acknowledged you. Say, if you don't want to let it sink in what you did, that's fine, but don't ignore them by just going like this, right? Because then what happens is you send a negative energy to someone who was trying to give you a positive energy. And we're all energy. That's, each of us is energy. And if we continue to send out negative energy, we attract back the same energy. So if we are putting out a lot of negative energy, let's say having anxiety about the future, like we were talking about earlier, if we continue to worry about and sending out that negative energy, we are going to attract back that negative energy. One thing that I learned was that the universe doesn't know positive from negative. It only knows what you are thinking. And so if we're thinking, let's say that, oh, this important conversation or important presentation I need to give in the future is going to be a disaster, all the universe knows is that, okay, you want this activity to be a disaster. And so it sends the energy to do that. Because, if we can get into the mindset that the universe actually wants to support us, we just have to give it direction. And it doesn't know positive from negative. It just knows very clearly, what are you saying? What are you thinking? That's what we're going to try and send you. Then for me, it gets me thinking much more positively and what I want as opposed to what I fear. And that's an important distinction. Now, I'm not perfect either. I mean, there's things that happen to me, but I'm much, much better at it now, where if I feel the stress starting to go up in a certain situation, I'm much more perceptive on what's going on and thinking, okay, what can I do to calm this situation in me? Because that's another thing that we have to remember, is that we can only affect ourselves. As much as we think we can control other people, we cannot. We cannot. Yes, there's rules. Maybe you have employees that you can supervise. You parent of children and stuff. But the reality is, the only person we can truly, truly affect is ourselves.
I really love the part where you mentioned about universe doesn't know negatives and positives, and that encourages you to think about what you want more than what you don't want. And I think that's actually more important revelation for me than the positives and negatives, because for a long time I had trouble understanding why would the universe doesn't understand the difference between positive and negative. But once you explain it in terms of focusing on what I don't want and focusing on what I do want, that's a huge difference. And it might be a small difference in names of word. It's usually negation, which is a couple of letters or maybe a small word in front of it. But in terms of energy and direction where it's going, that's a huge shift. So I really like as you tied it together in this sense. that okay, there is this one thing that everyone's talking about, positive, negative, which one you focus on. But when you go to the restaurant and you ask for a menu, you're not going to tell waiter all the things you don't want to have. You're going to ask, what do you actually want? And if you start telling the waiter, I don't want that, if you have a really good waiter, and let's say if you have pretty specific things that you don't want, you might get lucky and the waiter might be able to suggest you some things, but you still have to make a choice what you want at some point. But if you keep on insisting, waiter, I don't want that, waiter might give up at some point explaining, okay, you don't want cheese, okay, you don't want grated cheese, okay, if you keep on, it might be really hard to get a meal if you're trying to always focus on what you don't want.
That is a wonderful analogy, a very, very good one. Yes, it's true. In fact, I have a form that I filled out yesterday because I have a new eye doctor that I'm going to be going to. And one of their forms was similar to what you're saying here. It had all these list of things, the medical conditions. And there's probably 30 or 40 of them on this paper. And it says, please say yes or no to each one of them. And I'm thinking to myself, someone reviewing this, if I have to put no, 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 yes, no, 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 it's ridiculous. Just check them off, the ones that they should be looking at. Why make things so complicated, right? And so exactly what you're saying, I've never thought about that from a restaurant standpoint, but I could imagine going from the appetizer to the entree and just saying, no, I don't want this, no, I don't want that, no, I don't want this, no, I don't want that. And I think probably many of us have experienced something similar when we're in line at a coffee place and someone in front of you orders some sort of unique beverage has like 10 or 12 things listed on it. And I'm thinking to myself, how complicated is that? Whereas I just go and I say, I'll take one of whatever, and that's it. So yeah, great analogy.
Yeah, and just to change the topic a bit, I'm curious, how did you start out into, because your tagline is specifically stress relief made simple, what made you focus on stress specifically? And what's basically, I'm asking for origin story here.
Sure. Well, what happened? So Stress and I have had a lifelong relationship with each other. When I was a child, I grew up in an extremely dysfunctional family. My parents combined had 9 marriages, 7 divorces, and 1 widowing. And there was a lot of alcoholism, a lot of drug use. So it wasn't a positive environment. And similar to what we were talking about earlier, I tended to I just tried to ignore the stress instead of doing anything about it, which was okay because it allowed me to continue uh, to be successful as an adult. But where I started seeing stress really come into a huge effect on me was back in 2008. It was a perfect storm of stressful activities that was happening to me. My dad was dying and he needed his affairs to be taken care of. My mom had had major surgery and didn't have the insurance for her rehab, so she needed help. I was running a small business with a lot of employees that needed my attention. My kids were very small and wanted my attention, and my marriage was heading for a divorce. So all these things were just piling up on me. I ended up at one point losing 30 pounds in 30 days. And I was in my mid 40s, and I hadn't lost weight since my 20s. And I thought at first, this is great. I love it. I'm eating whatever I want. I'm not doing any extra exercise. I'm just doing my normal stuff. And then after the 30th pound came off, I decided that I'd have my blood work done. And the blood work came back and said that you have stress-induced diabetes. And what was interesting is they called it stress-induced because no one in my family had diabetes. And I was in shape. I wasn't doing anything that should have indicated that, other than I was under an enormous amount of stress. But like many people do, what I did was I continued to, burn the candle at both ends for another 10 years. And then I ended up in the emergency room and an extended stay in the intensive care unit with a severe case of diabetic ketoacidosis. And for those listeners that don't know what that is, basically my body was eating itself alive because of my stress. And what was interesting was that even in the ICU, I kept on pushing with my work. And I remember I was working for a medical device company, and at about 6 a.m. one morning, I get a text from my boss saying, "You have a webinar you need to run at 8 o'clock. What are you going to do about it?" And, I didn't have my work laptop in the hospital. I just had my phone. And I started trying to reschedule that webinar, pushing the envelope of my phone. And when I was admitted to the hospital, my blood sugars were so high that the medical grade glucometers could not read it. They just said high. And so the lab had to manually estimate that my blood sugars were 8 to 10 times higher than normal. And when I got this text, my numbers had come down to a point where the numbers were more reasonable. They were still high, but they were more reasonable. You could read them. And as soon as I started trying to reschedule this webinar, the nurse who was attending to me, she came over to check my blood, and the numbers came up. And instead of my numbers being like this, they shot straight up. And she says to me, "You realize that's what put you in this hospital bed in the first place." And this was pretty much a complete stranger. And I thought to myself, I am trading my health for my career, and that's a very bad trade. So I really thought long and hard in the hospital bed that day about what I was doing, realized that I wanted to be around to meet my future grandchildren and have a longer life than I was setting myself up for. And so I decided that after I got out of the hospital a couple days later, I decided I was going to just focus on myself on myself for the first time that I could remember. And I started experimenting with different stress relief tools and techniques. Many of them worked, some of them didn't. But what I noticed was that not only did my stress go down, my glucose numbers as a diabetic went down, my weight went down, and my energy level went way, way up. It was as if I had discovered a fountain of youth. And if you see pictures of me from 2008 and you see pictures of me today, I look younger today, other than a little bit more gray hair. I look younger today than I did 14 years ago. And that's what stress does to you. And so many of my former coworkers, my friends, family, they said, you ought to write a book about this and your experience and what worked for you. And so I did. I wrote a book. It did very well on Amazon. And then I just started posting different things on social media, et cetera, talking about different ways that people can help reduce their stress. And the thing that I found was that all the other books out there they focused on like one technique, or you would have to read a 300-page book just to get one idea. And the reality is, for most of us who are very busy, we don't have that time. The reality is, we have maybe 5 minutes before we go into an important meeting, or we have to have a conversation with somebody, or we got to do this particular work. And so that's what I focused most of the ideas in the book, was ideas that you can try that take 1, 2, 3 minutes. And the great thing about that is, if you try a technique that takes a minute or two and it doesn't work, big deal. It only took a 1 or 2 minutes. Next time, try something else. But if it does work, run with it. Use it anytime you feel your stress starting to go up. Because if we can get into the habit of having at least one technique that helps reduce our stress, and we use that on a daily basis, the compound benefits over time for ourselves will be enormous. But we've got to start today.
I really loved how you mentioned the idea of trying different techniques till something hits, because
Mhm.
that's what I've noticed also working with my clients and working on myself, is that some things don't work for some people, some things work, and the same thing works really well for other people.
Mhm.
And then there is confusion, what works for me? And this strategy is so simple. And I love how you also mentioned 1 minute, what you have to lose to try this strategy
Yeah.
for 1 minute. And then you try another one, then you try another one. And that's kind of really, I would say, successful mindset for actually applying. I really love how you share that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it just came from experience. It really did. And it's interesting. I always found one of the most common ones that people recommend is meditation. And that's a great example of something that, it does work for me, but it doesn't work great. It does, and the reason it doesn't is because, even, I've done transcendental meditation, trying to teach myself how to not have a distracted mind. But the reality is, I do. And so I have to let my mind go. And so when I'm meditating, my mind is all wandering all over the place. But I don't get as restful as that. What I find is that if I can just do a visualization exercise, or if I can, in conjunction with maybe deep breathing, it works so much better for me. But it's a perfect example, Tom's. I mean, a lot of people absolutely love meditation, and I'm a big proponent of it, but it's not one of my favorites.
So, what are your favorites, may I ask?
Well, so I mentioned visualization.
Mhm.
I absolutely love visualization, because what it does is it automatically calms you. When you calm your mind, it automatically calms your body. And so if we want, I can walk you through a 1 minute activity for that. And for your listeners, I want you to try this, but do not be behind the wheel of a car or on your bicycle while you're doing this, because this is something where you need to be either sitting primarily for 1 minute. So put the pause on listening to this if you're behind the wheel of a car or on your bicycle, and then pick it up once you're off that moving vehicle. But what you do is you close your eyes and you take a deep breath in, and I want you to go in your mind to a place you like to relax. It's your happy place. Maybe it's the beach, maybe it's a park, maybe it's a lake, maybe it's your backyard of your home, maybe it's a spa. Wherever you like to go to relax, go there now in your mind and take in all of your senses. So, what do you feel? Do you feel the sun on your face, maybe the sand or the grass under your feet. And what do you smell? Do you smell the fresh air? Maybe the lotion from the spa? What do you hear? Do you hear the wind blowing through the trees? Maybe the water splashing on shore? And what do you see? Do you see the blue sky? Maybe the green of the trees or the grass? Whatever it is, take it all in and then take another deep breath in. And open your eyes. How was that?
Very calming,
It
happy
is.
place.
It is a happy place. It grounds you. And what I love about that activity is it can be done at any place. Yeah, maybe you're sitting at your desk and maybe somebody just dumped a stack of work on your on you, or maybe you just pulled up in your car outside of a building where you're going to do an interview for a job and you're very nervous about it. You can calm yourself that way, but it's a wonderful activity and it just takes 1 minute.
I really love the practical part of it. It's not that often that I have something tangible in my podcast, so I really appreciate bringing some practicality into, also for the listeners. And I'm also already thinking of wrapping the podcast up. And one of the questions I always ask, and I haven't asked yet, is what's your take on a title, Love Your Stress?
I actually like that because when I heard that title for the very first time, what I thought of back to what we talked about before, good stress and bad stress. Because if we, the good stress, there has been numerous times where my eustress, EUSTRESS, has really helped me be successful. And, I welcome that. I welcome the stress that comes from, let's say, if I'm about to walk onto a stage with an audience, that's that nervous stress that I know, okay, I'm ready for this. And so those kinds of stressors, I truly do love. And so I think your title is good for that. Plus it also is a positive, because too many times when we think about stress, it's all on the negative. And so love your stress is a very positive spin. So to me, I think it's a great title.
Thank you. And I suddenly forgot which two emotions, but idea is that I think it was anxiety and fear. When you spoke the example of going to a stage, that the body reaction is exactly the same, and it's just the brain can decide, is it
Mm-hmm.
scary or is it actually exciting?
Mm-hmm.
Is it something good? So that's another thing. It's your brain that decides, oh, I'm actually looking forward to getting on the stage and speak, or it's like, oh, better not, I might get judged or anything like that. So body's reaction is the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's our mind's ability and power over how our body reacts to it. And, if we're going to be dumping the adrenaline and cortisol into our bodies regardless. So why not have it be a positive outcome as opposed to a negative outcome?
Yeah. And moving on towards finishing the podcast is, what would be the one thing you would love for the people who are listening to podcasts to take with them and remember from the conversation we had?
I would say don't trade your health for your career or any other responsibility you have, because that's a very bad trade. Without your health, nothing else matters. And for those who don't believe me, Think about the last time that you were really, really sick, maybe with the flu or something like that. You probably didn't feel like doing anything other than lying in bed. And when you're like that, you're no good to your business, your career, to your friends and family. Your health is paramount to your success. So don't trade your health for anything.
And one more thing I noticed in the background, you have lots of social media handles.
Mhm,
I would love
mhm.
to ask what's your role there, and if you're especially targeting some sort of people you would love to reach out to you, support you in any way. So yeah, just let us explain what's your role there. And
Sure. Yeah. So LinkedIn is where I'm most active on, and I post regularly, not, almost on a daily basis, different thoughts and ideas. So please feel free to reach out and connect with me. YouTube, I put usually my videos on different ideas and tips. That's not as consistent, but there's well over 100 in my channel. And then Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are also ones that I post, but not as frequently as LinkedIn. And every one of them, if you just search for Professor Pete Alexander, you should be able to find me.
that's awesome. And the final thing I love to ask is, do you have any recommendations for next person for you would think would be add some value to this podcast? Who would you like me to reach out to have a next
Oh,
episode?
that's a good question. Let's see. I would. Oh, let's see. There's so many different positive people that I know of. Um, let me give that a little bit more thought, because I
Okay.
have to really think about it, and I can send a couple of suggestions to you.
Yeah, and I usually, when people start going down this road, I usually say the first one on the mind is usually the best answer, but feel free to still think about it.
Then I would say, go ahead if you want to talk about positivity. Somebody who's really applying what he's learning, and he's posting very regularly, daily on LinkedIn, is June Chang.
Mm,
I would reach out to him.
awesome.
He would be a good person to talk to.
Thank you so much for recommendation, and that's it. I really enjoyed this talk, Professor Pete, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Toms, thank you so much for having me on your show, and I really appreciate your listeners' time as well.
Smile and be present.
Absolutely.